My meticulously ordered world was a lie. Here, in the glass-walled boardroom of Stratos Engineering, my career was dying. I'm Julian Vance, and my $2 billion Chicago Bridge project was 3 weeks from catastrophic failure. The concrete was cracking. The steel shipments were a phantom. Every by-the-book solution I implemented only tightened the noose. My boss, Marcus Thorne, didn't even look at me. He just stared out at the skyline I was supposed to be transforming forever. "Your system is failing, Julian," he said, his voice cold steel. "You're out of time." His words were a ghost, echoing a voice from 20 years ago, the one that sneered I was too messy to ever truly succeed. That voice wasn't Marcus's. It belonged to Alex Sterling. 20 years ago, we were partners on our senior engineering capstone. My workspace was a creative chaos of sketches and half-finished models. His was a sterile, unforgiving grid. He'd watch me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, as I wrestled with a radical new support structure. "This is why you'll always fail, Julian," he'd said, tapping a perfectly aligned blueprint on his own desk. "You're all brilliant sparks and no framework. You're too messy to succeed." He wasn't entirely wrong. My prototype collapsed during the final stress test. Alex, who had secretly adapted my core concepts into a rigid, predictable model, won the faculty prize. He got the internships, the fast track. I nearly got expelled. From that single humiliation, I forged a new identity. I built my career on unshakable systems, on a ruthless discipline that left no room for error or creativity. I became the anti-Alex by becoming a perfect copy of him. Spreadsheets became my shield, Gantt charts my sword. I built a fortress of order around myself, and for 2 decades, it had been impenetrable. Until now. The memory wasn't just a ghost, it was a blueprint for my entire life. Our senior capstone project wasn't a simple failure, it was a demolition. We were building a scaled suspension bridge. My design was revolutionary, using a complex tensegrity system no one had attempted. It was elegant, brilliant, and volatile. The night before the presentation, my desk was a storm of tools and discarded parts as I reinforced a weak point I'd discovered. Alex watched, silent, from his pristine workstation, his own, more conventional half of the model already perfect. During the stress test, in front of the entire faculty, our model held for a full minute longer than anyone expected. A murmur of awe went through the room. Then, a sickening crack. Not from the joint I'd spent all night fixing, but from a primary anchor point on Alex's side. The entire structure twisted and collapsed into a pile of mangled wire and splintered balsa wood. I was paralyzed by the public humiliation. The review board found the failure point immediately. A single load-bearing bolt, one size too small, deliberately misplaced. Sabotage so subtle, so deniable, I couldn't prove a thing. When the dust settled, Alex's rigid, over-engineered section was mostly intact, while my innovative, lighter section was obliterated. The official conclusion was that my unorthodox design had put undue stress on the entire structure. I confronted him in the empty lab that night, the smell of sawdust and failure thick in the air. He was polishing his faculty prize. "Why?" I asked, my voice hollow. He didn't even have the decency to look at me. "The best design is the one that works, Julian," he said, his voice as cold and sterile as his desk. "Yours was a beautiful risk. Mine was a guaranteed success. The industry doesn't reward risk, it rewards results." He was right. He got the coveted internship at the nation's top engineering firm. I got a lecture on academic integrity and a C- that cost me my scholarship. That night, I went back to my dorm and methodically tore up every creative sketch I'd ever made. I threw away my modeling tools and bought textbooks on process control and risk mitigation. I swore that from that day forward, no project of mine would ever fail because of a variable I hadn't accounted for. I would build systems so perfect that messy humanity could never break them. I became a master of the predictable, an architect of certainty. And Alex? He used that internship to launch his own firm, Sterling Dynamics. They became pioneers in rapid, modular construction. Aggressive, efficient, and wildly successful. They were the sharks that circled projects like mine, waiting for the first drop of blood in the water. Now, standing here in this boardroom, with the blood pouring from my $2 billion failure, I could almost hear his voice again. The industry doesn't reward risk. But what if he was wrong? After 20 years of building walls to keep the chaos out, I was beginning to realize the chaos was the only thing that could save me. My perfect, risk-averse system wasn't just failing. It was the cage I had built for myself. I walked out of that boardroom a dead man, but as the elevator descended, the sterile quiet was filled by a roaring in my ears. The panic was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in 2 decades. Rage. Pure, unsystematized rage. Marcus Thorne saw a failure. I was beginning to see a crime scene. Back in my office, I ignored the project dashboards blinking red on my monitors. The system was compromised. The fortress I'd built was being torn down from the inside, and the blueprints were my own. I had to stop thinking like the man I'd become, and start thinking like the kid Alex had destroyed. I had to look for the beautiful risk, the elegant flaw. I had to find the chaos and the order. I started with the concrete. The mix reports were perfect. The supplier, Semtech, was industry-leading. But the fractures were real. My system said, trust the supplier. The ghost of my younger self whispered, trust no one. I spent the next 18 hours digging, not into engineering specs but into corporate filings. Semtech was clean, but their primary supplier for a crucial chemical admixture, a company called Viridian Additives, was a ghost. It was a shell corporation, buried under layers of holding companies. I bypassed our internal vetting and traced it up the chain, through Delaware and the Cayman Islands, until I landed on a name that made the air in my lungs turn to ice: Sterling Dynamics. It was him. It had to be. But how? The evidence was circumstantial. I needed the mechanism, the undersized bolt. I pulled up the independent chemical analysis reports for our concrete pours. My team had flagged them as normal, but I stared at the data until the numbers blurred. And then I saw it. A trace element. A variant of chloride, almost statistically insignificant, but it wasn't supposed to be there. It was a catalyst. An accelerant. It was forcing the concrete to cure fractions of a percent too fast, creating invisible internal stresses, a ticking time bomb laid at a molecular level. It was sabotage so sophisticated, so deeply embedded in the process, that my system was designed to overlook it. The steel was even simpler, more brutal. The shipments existed. The bills of lading were legitimate. But I bypassed our internal logistics software and went straight to the Port Authority's raw data feeds. Our containers were being diverted, re-tagged at the last minute and shipped to a holding yard in Indiana. The logistics firm authorizing the diversions? A small, independent contractor. A quick search showed it was acquired 6 months ago. The new owner, a subsidiary of Sterling Dynamics. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a cell door slamming shut. Alex wasn't just waiting for me to fail, he was the architect of it. He had studied my fortress of order for years, learned its every rule, every protocol. And he had turned my greatest strength, my unwavering faith in the system, into the perfect weapon for my own execution. He had built a cage around my cage. The concrete wasn't the only thing cracking. It was my entire life's work, my 20-year shield. And he was standing on the outside, a sledgehammer in his hand, ready for the final swing. He hadn't just sabotaged my bridge, he had sabotaged my very identity. The rage I expected, the explosive fury, never came. Instead, a profound, chilling calm settled over me. It was the quiet of a pressure vessel right before it bursts. I stared at the web of shell corporations and falsified data on my screen, not as a victim, but as a strategist viewing a map of enemy territory. Alex hadn't just built a better trap, he'd used my own blueprints to do it. My first instinct, the one drilled into me for 20 years, was to gather the evidence, build a case, and present it to Marcus Thorne. But the man I was 20 years ago, the messy, impulsive kid, screamed from his shallow grave. He knew Alex. Alex would have a dozen escape routes planned. The data would be scrubbed, the holding companies dissolved. I'd be left looking like a paranoid, conspiracy-obsessed failure, grasping at straws to excuse my own incompetence. Alex was counting on me to follow the rules. He was baiting me into a fight on his terms, in an arena he controlled. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Slowly, I stood and walked to the wall-sized Gantt chart that governed my life. It was a monument to order, a tapestry of deadlines and dependencies woven with relentless logic. It was beautiful, it was perfect. And it was a complete and utter lie. The system wasn't the solution, it was the weapon being used against me. The fortress wasn't protecting me, it was my tomb. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text from Marcus. Board meeting. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Bring a recovery plan or don't bother coming at all. The ultimatum should have terrified me. Instead, it clarified everything. There was no recovery plan. The old project was dead, and so was the man who ran it. You can't fix a structure that was designed to fail from its foundation. You have to build something new. I turned back to my desk, ignoring the perfectly aligned project binders. I pushed aside my keyboard and pulled out a clean sheet of paper, the first blank page I'd willingly faced in decades. I picked up a pen. The rage I'd been suppressing finally found its voice. Not in a shout, but in the quiet, steady scratching of ink on paper. I wasn't sketching a bridge. I wasn't designing a solution. I was drawing a new trap. And this time, I was the one who knew every weakness, every stress point, and every secret vulnerability of the man I was building it for. Alex thought he was fighting a project manager. He was about to meet the messy, unpredictable engineer he tried to bury 20 years ago. And I was going to make him pay for the demolition. I spent the rest of the night not as a project manager but as a saboteur. My office, once a temple to order, transformed back into the chaotic workshop of my youth. Blueprints were unrolled and covered in frantic red ink. I ran dozens of new stress simulations, but I wasn't looking for a solution. I was engineering a new problem, a beautiful, elegant, and utterly fictional flaw. Wind shear. Harmonic resonance. I buried the lie deep in the original architectural specs, a fatal oversight that would cause catastrophic vibrations in the main suspension cables under specific, high-wind conditions. It was plausible. It was terrifying. And most importantly, the only viable, last-minute fix would be a series of external modular reinforcements. The kind of proprietary, rapid deployment technology that was the sole specialty of Sterling Dynamics. I was building a cage, custom-fitted to my prey. I compiled my findings into a dense, jargon-filled report, complete with faked simulation data and doctored seismic charts. It looked like the work of a man who had finally cracked under the pressure, a desperate Hail Mary, based on a terrifying new discovery. At 3 in the morning, I saved the file, project_Aries_cable_resonance_fatal_urgent.pdf to a shared company server, a server I knew had a back door. 3 months ago, our IT department had flagged a minor security breach originating from an IP address that, after my own late-night digging, I had traced back to a server farm leased by a Sterling Dynamics subsidiary. At the time, I'd dismissed it as corporate espionage, annoying but manageable. Now, it was a direct line into my enemy's brain. To sell the lie, I had to become the lie. I left a rambling, panicked voicemail for my lead engineer, knowing her phone had likely been compromised. It's not the concrete, Sarah. It was never the concrete. The whole design is flawed from the foundation up. It's a death trap. Then, I sent an email to my entire senior team with the subject line, "All hands emergency 5 a.m. call." But I deliberately, fat-fingered, the distribution list, adding a low-level logistics coordinator I'd long suspected of feeding information to competitors. Attached was my bombshell report. I hit send and watched the digital breadcrumbs fly. For the next 2 hours, I did nothing. I sat in the dark, the Chicago skyline glittering outside my window. The chaos I had unleashed was invisible, a silent cascade of data and deception. Alex would see the report. His ego wouldn't let him resist. He'd see me not as a threat, but as a pathetic, broken man handing him the keys to the kingdom. He would believe he was the shark, circling a bleeding victim. He had no idea I was the one who had chummed the water. When my alarm chimed at 7:30 a.m., I didn't feel dread. I felt a strange, electric calm. I put on my suit, straightened my tie, and picked up a single, slim folder. It contained none of my evidence against Alex. No corporate filings, no shipping manifests. Just a one-page summary of my fabricated resonance flaw. I walked into the boardroom at exactly 8 a.m. The air was thick with tension. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table, flanked by the entire executive board of Stratos Engineering. They looked like a panel of executioners. "Julian," Marcus began, his voice flat, "your recovery plan." I walked to the head of the table and placed the single sheet of paper in front of him. I didn't look at it. I looked at him. "There is no recovery plan," I said, my voice clear and steady. The room went silent. I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes burning into me. The project, as designed, is a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. The concrete and steel issues are merely symptoms of a much deeper problem. A fundamental flaw in the pylon and cable design that makes the entire structure susceptible to harmonic resonance. In a high-wind event, the bridge won't just crack, it will tear itself apart. I let the words hang in the air. I saw shock, then anger, ripple across their faces. "You're telling us our $2 billion flagship project is a dud?" a board member snapped. "I'm telling you the original design, the one approved by this board, was a fatal risk from day one," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. My systems, my management, were focused on executing that design perfectly. The failure was in trusting the design itself. I was confessing, but I was also planting a seed of doubt, shifting the blame from execution to the very foundation of their prized project. Marcus stared at the paper, his face a mask of disbelief. "What are you proposing, Julian? That we tear it down and start over?" "No," I said, "there's no time. There is only one company in the world with the technology to salvage this. They have a proprietary modular bracing system that can be retrofitted onto the existing pylons. It's our only shot." I paused, letting them all arrive at the conclusion before I said the name. "We need to hire Sterling Dynamics." The name landed like a grenade. An audible gasp came from someone down the table. Sterling was our fiercest competitor. Bringing them in was not just an admission of failure, it was a total surrender. Marcus Thorne looked up from the paper, his eyes boring into me, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of a lie. He saw only a man who had accepted his own professional death. "You want me to hand Alex Sterling our most important project on a silver platter because you screwed up?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I want you to save the bridge," I replied, my tone even. "My career is already over. The only thing that matters now is mitigating the disaster." I was offering them a scapegoat, me, and a savior, Alex. It was a deal too perfect for them to refuse, and a trap too tempting for Alex to ignore. I had laid the cheese. Now, I just had to wait for the snap. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the silence stretching for an unbreachable minute. He was looking at a dead man. He had no idea he was actually looking at a ghost. Finally returned to the scene of the crime. The silence in the boardroom stretched until it was thin enough to snap. Marcus Thorne's eyes were chips of granite, assessing me. He wasn't looking at a broken man, he was looking at a liability. Finally he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Get him in here." The meeting was set for 2 hours later in the same room. I sat in my designated chair, a prisoner awaiting the arrival of his executioner. When Alex Sterling walked in, flanked by 2 lawyers, he looked exactly as I remembered, only harder, sharper. The condescending smirk was still there, now polished by 20 years of relentless success. He didn't offer a handshake. "Julian," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I heard you'd built yourself a beautiful risk. Some things never change." I met his gaze, forcing my expression into one of weary defeat. "Alex, thanks for coming on such short notice. When a $2 billion bridge is about to take a dive into the Chicago River, my schedule tends to open up," he said, a predator circling its kill. He turned to Marcus and the board. "My team has reviewed the data Mr. Vance was kind enough to share. The resonance flaw is severe but manageable. Our proprietary modular stabilizers are the only viable retrofit. It won't be cheap." He slid a contract across the table. It wasn't a proposal, it was a ransom note. The price was astronomical, nearly a quarter of the project's total budget. But the terms were the true poison. Sterling Dynamics would assume operational control of the site, have final sign-off on all materials, and Stratos would sign a sweeping non-disclosure agreement, effectively gagging us from ever admitting the project's core design was flawed. He was not just demanding our money, he was demanding our reputation. "This is extortion," one of the board members hissed. Alex shrugged, a picture of calm indifference. "It's the price of a miracle. The price of avoiding a public catastrophe that will bankrupt you. Take it or leave it." All eyes turned to me. I was the architect of this humiliation. I cleared my throat. "We have no other option," I said, the words tasting like ash. "We have to sign." Marcus Thorne stared at me for a long moment, then at the contract. With a stroke of his pen, he signed away our surrender. Alex's lawyers countersigned. The deal was done. Alex leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He had won. Again. He had taken my failure and monetized it, just as he had 20 years ago. "Well then," he said, turning to me, "let's get to work cleaning up your mess." I didn't move. I simply looked at him, the weary, defeated mask falling away from my face. A profound, chilling calm settled over me. "We will," I said, my voice suddenly clear and hard. "But first, there's been a slight change of plans." I slid a second folder across the table, stopping it directly in front of Alex. His smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "You see, the resonance flaw doesn't exist," I stated quietly. The room went dead silent. "I invented it 3 nights ago. The simulations are fake. The seismic charts are forgeries. It was a diagnostic, a lie designed to get you in this room, to lock you into an ironclad contract, to fix a project you yourself sabotaged." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, precise tone. "I know about Viridian Additives, the shell corporation you use to supply the compromised concrete admixture. I know about the trace chlorides, accelerating the cure time, creating microfractures throughout the structure. And I know you acquired the logistics contractor who's been diverting our steel shipments to a holding yard in Indiana." Alex's face went white. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked panic. His lawyers started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't bother," I said, my eyes locked on Alex. "Your contract is with Stratos Engineering. You are now legally obligated, at your own expense, to salvage this project. And the first step of that salvage operation will be delivering the 500 tons of steel you have stolen from us. The second will be replacing every cubic yard of concrete your company deliberately poisoned." I stood up, the power in the room shifting as tangibly as a tectonic plate. The board stared, mouths agape, as the truth of my gambit dawned on them. Marcus Thorne looked from the signed contract to Alex's ashen face, and for the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than contempt appeared in his eyes. I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of Alex Sterling. He looked small now, trapped. The cage I'd built wasn't made of steel and wire, but of his own greed and a legally binding contract. The industry doesn't reward risk, Alex, I said, my voice barely a whisper, echoing his words from 2 decades ago. It rewards results, and you just guaranteed ours. Alex's face was a mask of disbelief, crumbling into pure, venomous rage. You have no proof, he spat, his voice a ragged hiss. His lawyers, pale and sweating, were already shaking their heads, whispering urgently in his ear. I don't need it, I said, my voice cutting through their murmurs. Your signature on that contract is all the proof I need. You just legally bound Sterling Dynamics to fix a project you claim to understand. A project whose flaws are now your sole responsibility, so you can either deliver the steel you stole and replace the concrete you poisoned, or you can explain to a judge during a fraud discovery why you couldn't. Your choice. The cage had slammed shut. There was no escape clause for this. He had walked in a predator and was now nothing more than prey. The lawyers fell silent. Alex stared at the contract, then at me, the look in his eyes one of utter, bottomless hatred. He shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the polished floor. This isn't over, Vance, he seethed. It was over 20 years ago, Alex, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. You just never realized it. You built your empire on a single, stolen idea. Now you get to pay for it with everything you've earned since. He turned and stormed out of the room, his legal team scrambling in his wake. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence. The entire board was staring at me, a mixture of shock, awe, and raw terror on their faces. It was Marcus who finally broke the silence. He slowly picked up the contract Alex had signed, holding it like an unexploded bomb. My God, Vance, he breathed. You gambled this entire company on a bluff. I looked out the window at the skeleton of my bridge, no longer seeing a failure but a monument to a debt finally paid. No, Marcus, I said, turning back to him. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't calculating risk. I wasn't following a system. I picked up my slim folder from the table, the one containing the fake report. I was just finding the structural weakness in my opponent and applying pressure until it collapsed. I had stopped trying to be a perfect copy of Alex Sterling. And in doing so, I had finally, truly beaten him. The messy kid with the brilliant sparks was back. And he had just burned his oldest enemy to the ground. What's a trait someone criticized you for that you actually use to your advantage now? I'm curious to hear your stories.